so much. Thank you so much. Great. It's good to be back and it's good to resume our classes. Okay, a quick announcement before we move forward. So basically, I'm just, till 24th of February, as I might have mentioned before. So one other student, Preet, who's not here today right now. So his exam is on 24th. So in India, Cambridge exams have a different schedule. I don't know why, but till then we'll be just, doing quick revision of all the topics that we have already studied. But after 24th, so we'll still have good 3 months, like till March, April, and May, right? So then we'll start off with comprehensive revision of all the topics that you want me to cover. And alongside, obviously, we'll be doing a couple of past papers practice as well, right? So till then, just kind of bear with me till 24th of February. And after that, I will be following what you want me to do, right? So as we discussed previously as well, there are a few topics that you find confusing, and those are also very important from exam point of view, like marginal utility, labor market, and things like that. So then we'll come back to those topics, right? So in today's class, we'll practice labor market. One more question of labor market. We'll see how much time we have. I don't mind doing more, but let's get started. So can you guys see my screen? So here's the first question that we'll do today, right? So the question here says, explain whether there is a link between marginal revenue product of labor and the wage rate in an occupation, right? Now, what is marginal revenue product of labor, right? So the first thing that you need to define that what is marginal revenue product of labor. So you would remember marginal means additional, right? Revenue means the cash or the income that a business generates from the sale of its products, and labor is basically exactly. So as Mubin rightly said, marginal physical product multiplied by marginal revenue is your marginal revenue product of labor. Excellent, right? That's correct, right? So let's first define it and then we'll come to the formula and all that, right? So marginal revenue product of labor is the additional revenue that each additional unit of labor generates, right? So that is what that's what's marginal revenue product of labor is. Now think about this. So let's say there is a factory. Let me explain you in more detail. So let's say there's a factory that manufactures t-shirts, right? So when you hire the first person in the factory, how many units of t-shirts does that person produce? That will be your marginal product. Now it might be a little confusing, but you have to, kind of pay close attention to this to understand what's the difference between marginal product and marginal revenue product, right? And think about this. Let's make a table sort of a thing, right? So this, we need a couple of columns here, right? So let's get started with these first. Okay, now think about this, students. So on the extreme left column, I'm writing units of labor, right? So it will show us how many units of labor a company has hired, a business or a company has hired, right? So units of labor on the first column, then you have marginal physical product. Now, what is marginal product or marginal physical product? As we sometimes say, I'm only writing as marginal product. This means additional units that you get from hiring of one additional unit of labor. Marginal product of labor means additional units of output that you get by hiring one more unit of labor, right? I'll show you how we calculate this. And then comes in the price per unit, right? So right now we are assuming that the price of each t-shirt, that this, that the labor produces in this factory is fixed, right? So each t-shirt is, let's say, selling for 500 rupees or let's say 600 rupees, but whatever the price is, that's fixed. And then in the last column, I'll mention marginal revenue product, right? So have a look at this. So before we get started, one thing that you need to remember is that each additional unit of labor will produce less output, right? Now, what do I mean by that? Just give me a second. Marginal revenue product, marginal revenue product of labor, right? Okay, now think about this. So just like there's diminishing marginal utility. Now, what does diminishing marginal utility means, right? I'm giving you this analogy so that you can better understand that when you consume the first unit of, let's say, first glass of water, and let's say you are really thirsty, you will enjoy it the most. Then you consume the second glass of water It will give you some utility, some satisfaction, but not as much as the first one did, right? And then you consume the third one, it will give you something lesser than the second. It will give you some lesser utility compared to the second glass of water, and so on and so forth. Similarly, there is diminishing marginal product of labor, or diminishing marginal product of labor, which basically means that each additional unit of labor will contribute less to the output, right? So thinking of this factory which manufactures t-shirts, right? So when you hire the first person in that factory, and that person will have all the machines, right? So I'm assuming that this is a normal clothing factory where you have labor plus capital, like machines, and with that you use, and with that you produce t-shirts, right? So when you hire the first employee in the factory, then all the machinery is available to that one person. Are you getting me? So let's think of another example. So think of a kitchen, right? A restaurant with a kitchen. In that kitchen, you have oven, you have stove, you have, I don't know, a couple of other cooking utensils. So when you hire the first chef, that first chef has everything available to him or herself, right? So whenever he or she wants to, do anything, he can use at his or her convenience, right? But when you hire the second guy, right? So after you hire the first person, let's say this first person produced 100 t-shirts on his own, right? Then with the same capital, when you hire the second employee, right? So the output will increase, the total output will increase, but the additional guy will not produce as much output as the first guy did. So marginal product, in fact, I should have added another column as well. I should have added the total product column as well. So if you just give me a minute, I'll quickly explain this, because this is a very crucial component. And without this, you will not be able to fully understand the concept of uh, labor demand, right? Okay, now have a look at this. So let's say this was units of labor, like how many units of labor you are hiring. On this column, I'm mentioning total product. Total product is total output. Product basically means output that a business is producing. So this is total product. Then in the next column, you have marginal product of labor, or just simply speaking, marginal product, right? Then you have price of each unit of the good, like the goods that this labor is producing, how much is its price in the market, right? How much is its price in the market? That would be simply the price, right? Price of each unit of the good, price per unit, right? Price per unit of the good. And then you have marginal revenue product. Then you have marginal revenue product of labor, or you can simply write this down as marginal revenue product, right? Is this making sense, students? Have a look at this. Okay, now when you hired the first guy, the total output of the factory was, let's say, 100 units. When you hired the second guy, the total output did increase. Students, have a look at this. After the first person, the total number of t-shirts, let's say, that were being produced was 100. Then when you hired the second guy, the total output of the factory rose to 180, right? So the total product did rise, but the additional guy, like the second unit of labor, did not produce as much as the first person. So the first guy on his own produced 100 units of the good. The second guy on his own produced how many? The second guy on his own produced only 80. How do we know that? So you subtract 100 from 180 to get the additional units that this guy contributed to the factory. Students, are you following me or not? This is making sense, right? So this guy on his own produced 80, right? Then you hired the third person, the total output will still rise. So let's say now your total output of the factory is 240 units, right? Then you hired the fourth guy and the total output, let's say, rises to, let's say, 280. And then you hired the fifth guy, and the total output of the factory, let's say, rises to 320, and so on, and let's say 310, let's say, right? So the total output rises to 310, and then you hire the sixth guy, and your total output increases to, let's say, 320. Okay, students, are you following me? Now, what's the pattern you can observe over here, right? So if you see, your marginal product of labor is diminishing. Marginal product of labor is diminishing, which means each additional unit of labor is contributing less to output. The total output is still increasing. Please remember this. The total product is still increasing, but how much is the additional person contributing to the output? That is your marginal product, and that is diminishing, right? So just like in utility, what happens? It's not that when you consume the second glass of water, your total utility decreases. No, your total utility increases, but the additional utility that you extracted from the second glass of water, that was less compared to the first one. Are you following me or not, students? Now, what you have to do in every case, you have to take the difference between the rows, right? So 240 minus, let me change the color. So if you subtract 180 from 240, right? So you get how much? 60. So the third guy contributed 60 units to the output. Then you take the difference between 240 and 280. So that gives you 40. So the fourth guy on his own contributed 40 units of output to the firm. Then the fifth guy, you take the difference of these two, you get how much? 30. And then you take the difference of these two, how much do you get? 10, right? So you can see for yourself that each additional unit of labor contributed less to output. And this is what is known as diminishing marginal product of labor, right? Now, let's assume that the price of each unit of t-shirt is fixed at 200. Let's say, let's make it simple, $10, right? So Mubin, let me quickly add a point over here. Not in every market, the price of each unit of the good stays same, right? As you produce more units of the good, your marginal revenue also decreases. But since in this case, price is fixed, so marginal revenue will also be fixed. Is this making sense, or is it too complicated to understand? Right? So students, think about this. In perfect competition, what did we assume? In perfect competition, we assumed that the price of each unit of the good is constant. Price of each unit of the good is constant. How do we know that? Because the demand curve for a firm in perfect competition is a straight horizontal line. Yes or no? Am I making sense to you all? Right? So when it's a straight line, what it basically means that each unit of the good will be sold for the same price, right? So if the price of each unit of the good is $10, then every additional unit of the good will be sold for $10, right? But this is price taker. This is price taker. Perfect competition. Amna, are you following me? Right? So in perfect competition, the firms are price taker. Why? Because whatever price is prevailing in the market, you can only sell at that price, nothing more, nothing less, right? So price taker, right? Price maker is when you have less competition. When you have less competition, you have your own brand and you can charge a different price for your product, right? Now, this is how the shape of demand curve in perfect competition looks like. But when you think of the demand curves in other market structures, what do we mean by other market structures? So if you remember, we talked about 4 market structures: perfect competition, monopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic competition. So in every other market structure, apart from perfect competition, the demand curve is downward sloping. The demand curve is downward sloping. Yes or no? Do you remember that, right? So what does it mean for the demand curve to be downward sloping? That means that if you have to sell more units of the good, what do you need to do? Right? So you have to decrease the price of each unit of the good if you want to sell more units of the good. Am I making sense to you all? Right? So let's say if initially the demand in the market was 100 units, right? So then let's say initially you were selling each unit for $10. But then if you want to sell a larger quantity, if you want to increase the demand for that good from 100 to, let's say, 150 units, then you have to reduce the price of each unit of the good from $10 to, let's say, $8. And similarly, if you want to further increase the demand for your product in the market, then you have to sell it even lesser than that, right? You have to sell it even lesser than that, right? So let's say 180 units of the good, then each unit has to be sold for $7 and vice versa. You can choose any other quantity. So let's say if you want to sell 220 units of the good, then you have to sell each unit for $6 and so on, right? This is making sense. Price and demand have inverse relationship in other market structures. So this demand curve is true for the other 3 market structures, which I can add the names for you to remember. So there's monopoly, there's monopolistic competition, and there is oligopoly. So for these 3 market structures, demand curve is always monopolistic competition, and the last one is oligopoly, right? So for these market structures, the demand curve is downward sloping, but for perfect competition, as we just saw, in that case, the demand curve is a straight horizontal line, which means price stays constant. Yes or no? So if we are assuming that it's a perfect competition market, then you can keep the price of each unit of the good the same, no matter how many units you are selling. So regardless of how many units of the good you are selling, each unit can be sold at the same price. How many of you are absolutely clear with this? How many of you are absolutely clear? Is this making sense, students? Right? Okay. Now, in the last column, what you need to do, very nice, right? In the last column, it's marginal revenue product. So have a look at this. So marginal revenue product of labor is basically, right? So marginal revenue, the short form of marginal revenue product is MRPL, right? So that's the acronym, marginal revenue product of labor. So that is equals to marginal product of labor, which we'll write down as marginal product, MPL, marginal product of labor, which is physical quantities, how many physical units of the good you are producing, times the price, right? Times the price, or you can also write this down as marginal revenue if that's a non-perfect competition. So if it's a non-perfect competition market, you will write marginal revenue, but otherwise price per unit is fixed. So that's why you can write price. Okay. Now the last column, what you need to do, you just need to multiply these two columns. You need to multiply these two columns, right? So how much revenue did the first person generate for the company? How much revenue did the first person generate for the company? So 100 was the total units that the person produced, and each t-shirt is selling for $10. So that guy on his own contributed revenue of $1,000 for the company. Similarly, the second guy on his own contributed a revenue of $800 for the company. The third guy contributed a revenue of $600, right? And then you have $400, and then you have $300, and then you have the last of all is last. Yes.
PL is equal to wage, then what does that happen? What is that? MRPL is equal to wage.
Yes. Let me answer that. MRPL is equals to wage, and now comes in the main part. Exactly. That's a very good question. Okay. Now, when we say that marginal revenue product of labor is equals to wage rate of that labor, right? So let's quickly plot this, right? So if we quickly plot this graph, right, for you to understand, I mean, it's no rocket science, but just to show you, to help you visualize the way it looks like, it will be a downward sloping curve, right? It will be a downward sloping curve. Now have a look at this, students. Just a second. Right? Okay. Now you have marginal revenue product of labor on the y-axis. You have marginal revenue product of labor on the y-axis, and you have quantity of labor on the x-axis. So as we just saw, when you hire more units of labor, each additional person is contributing less to your revenue, right? So that means what? That it will turn out to be a downward sloping curve. It will turn out to be a downward sloping curve, and you can just label all these points on the curve, right? Like this. I'll show you how. Just a second. Right? Now have a look at this, students. So if the first guy is contributing a revenue of, let's say this is point A, the first guy is contributing a revenue of $1,000, the second guy 800, and so on. I'm not labeling all the points. You got my point, what I'm trying to show. Now think about this. If the first person is generating a revenue of $1,000 for your company, now my question to you is, think of yourself as the business owner. If you are owner of this factory and you know exactly, you know for sure, excuse me, you know for sure that this first person, XYZD, whatever his name is, he generated a revenue of $1,000 for your company. Would you ever be willing to pay him something more than $1,000? Think again. So if I am generating, how can Mega Lecture calculate my revenue that I generate for the company? Exactly, right? So how many students am I teaching? So let's say I'm teaching 10 students at Mega Lecture, and each student is paying me $1,000. That would be too much, right? Whatever amount they're paying, right? So you just multiply the number of students I'm teaching. If each student is paying me whatever amount it is, you multiply that with that. So that's the total revenue I generate for my company every month or whatever, right? Now, Mega Lecture would never want to pay me that much. That's the max that they would want to pay me. Something more? Not at all. Absolutely no, right? Something less? Yes, perhaps, because then they can earn more profit. So if they pay me less and they generate more revenue against my services, then that means that Mega Lecture is making more profit. Are you getting what I'm trying to say, right? So coming back to the point, so when we say that this is your marginal revenue product of labor / wages, so we don't mean that these are the wages that will be actually paid. I repeat myself. These are not the wages that will be actually paid to each person. These are just the maximum wage that the company might be willing to offer to its employees. That's the maximum wage that the company would be willing to offer to its employees. So for the first employee, the company would be willing to offer maximum of $1,000. If the company has to hire 2 units of labor, if the company has to hire 2 units of labor, now think about this. How much was the second guy generating? How much was the second guy generating? $800. So $800, each person will be hired at $800. Are you getting me or not? So the maximum that the company will be willing to pay to 2 workers would be $800 each. Are you getting me? So these are technically the wages, max wages that the company would be willing to pay. Max wages that company would be. Are you following me or not? Willing to pay. That's what it shows, right? It's not the actual wage that it pays. What are the actual wages that are being paid? I'll show you in a bit. What are the actual wages that are being paid in the market to each unit of labor? I'll show you in a bit, right? But for that, stay with me, right? This is making sense. Amna, Mubin, is everything clear? So when you calculate this table and you calculate the marginal revenue product of labor, then how do you construct? Then how do you construct the labor demand curve? So you construct the labor demand curve by plotting these 2 columns. So you plot units of labor on what axis? You plot unit of labor on the x-axis, and you plot the marginal revenue product of labor on what axis? On y-axis. Is everything clear so far? Now we are moving to the next part, right? After this, now this is just one factory that is manufacturing t-shirts. What was the example that I gave you? This is the example of one factory, one clothing brand like Gohar Textile Mill or XYZD Textile Mill. That's one factory that's manufacturing t-shirts. But is it very unlikely to have only one firm in a country that manufactures t-shirts? Obviously yes, right? So most probably there will be a couple of other firms and a couple of other companies that are manufacturing t-shirts. Students, are you following me or not? Right now you do the same. What do? You do the same for all the companies or all the businesses that are willing to hire production workers that manufacture t-shirts in that country. Am I making sense here, right? So just like you constructed this labor demand curve for, let's say, company C, right? So let's say the name of this company is XYZ, right? Now, similarly, let's say there's one more business in the company. We are taking a simple example. So there's one more business in that country that also hires, that also manufactures t-shirts. Obviously there will be a couple more, but for the sake of simplicity we are assuming that there's only one more business that manufactures t-shirts, right? Now again it will have a downward sloping demand curve. What do we have on the y-axis? So on the y-axis you have marginal revenue product of labor, and on the x-axis you have quantity of labor. Any confusion so far, students? Anything that's not clear? Anything you want to ask me here, right? Now similarly, when you look at the points over here, right? So you will have couple of different points. So let's say for the first employee, they're willing to pay, let's say, for the first employee, they're willing to pay, let's say, $1,000 for the wage rate of, let's say, 800, right? They're willing to hire, let's say, 5 people, right? Or let's say, 5 people. Oh, that should have been 1,000, not 100, right? 5 people, and then, so on and so forth, right? This is making sense so far. Okay, I'm coming there, Amna. Just give me a second. It will just take me a few more minutes and I'll explain you the entire concept, right? So let me make a neater diagram over here so that we can look at it in more detail. Is everyone clear with the example, students? Now think about this. What is an industry? Industry is collection of firms that manufacture same product. I repeat myself. What is industry? Industry is collection of firms that manufacture or produce same product. Any confusion so far, students? If there's any confusion, please ask me right now, right? And then you will have I mean, we are a little short of space here, but I'll try to adjust it over here, right? Okay. Okay. Just a second. Let's try to reduce the size. Right. Okay. Just give me a minute, because if I don't draw this neat diagram with exact values, I'm sure that you will still be confused at some points, which I don't want. So that's why I'm taking all this time to make a neater diagram for you to understand what exactly is happening. Okay, now students, think of the example first. Now there is this factory. What is industry? Industry is collection of firms that produce same product, right? So if I say online teaching, is Mega Lecture the only company in Pakistan that is producing online, providing online teaching services? Just answer yes or no. The answer is no, right? Is Bata, Service, are the only brands that manufacture shoes in Pakistan? The answer is no, right? Which means there are a couple of other brands as well, right? Now, what is industry? When I say shoe industry means Bata, Service, Metro, I don't know, whatever are all the brands that manufacture shoes, right? So they collectively make up shoe industry. When I talk about online teaching industry, then that includes Mega Lecture, other firms that provide online teaching, and so on and so forth. Now, for the sake of simplicity, right? Now, what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to assume that there are only two brands. There are only two brands that produce that product, right? So if we think of t-shirts, let's stick to the same example that we were taking, right? So we were talking about t-shirts. So let's say that only two brands in the country, Levi's and Tommy Hilfiger or whatever, right? Or Nike or whatever you want to assume it, right? So these are the only two brands that manufacture t-shirts in this country. Is this making sense or not? Now, what you will do, first of all, you will find out their individual demand curves. I repeat myself. First of all, you'll find the individual demand curves, individual labor demand curves for these two companies, right? So on the y-axis, as you can see, you have what? On the y-axis, you have marginal revenue product of labor, and against that you have the quantity of labor. Similarly, for the second company, Tommy Hilfiger as well, you have marginal revenue product of labor on the y-axis and quantity of labor on the x-axis, right? Now, what you are drawing over here is a downward sloping demand curve, labor demand curve, right? Yes or no? Now, what is this showing us? Let's take some values, right? So on $1,000, let's say on $1,000, right? Levi's is willing to hire the one person, right? Let's say, right? And then on for a wage rate or for marginal revenue product of labor, let's say the second guy is generating a revenue of, let's say, $900, right? The third guy is generating a revenue of, let's say, third guy is generating a revenue of, let's say, $800, right? And then the fourth guy, so on and so forth, right? Right. Fourth guy is generating a revenue of, let's say, $600, right? And the fifth guy is generating a revenue of, let's say, $500. Is everyone clear on this, right? Now, these values are already calculated by the firm, right? You don't need to worry about it because the company has all the data, and against that data, the company will determine its demand for labor. Are you getting me, right? So think about this. Now, what is this showing us? First, let's understand this demand curve and then move to the next demand curve and so on, right? Now, students, think about this. If the wages, what it actually shows, that if the wage for labor in the market is $1,000, how many units of labor will Levi's want to hire? I repeat myself. If the wage, what is actually the wage in the market, we don't know yet. We will get to see in a bit. But if the wage rate in the market is $1,000, Levi's will only hire one unit of labor. Why? Because it's only the first guy who is able to generate a revenue of $1,000. Are you getting me or not? Right? Are you getting me or not? Right? But if the wage rate is $900 per unit, per month, then Levi's will want to hire 2 people. He creates the most revenue. Then he would want to hire 2 people. Why? Because the first guy will generate a revenue of $1,000. The second guy will generate a revenue of $900, right? So both units of labor are economically feasible for Levi's. Yes or no, right? And so on and so forth. Now, similarly, let's start filling out the values in the second graph as well, right? Now, let's say for Tommy, the first unit is being hired at. Yes, go on.
I was gonna ask you, why would Levi's have 2 units of labor when one can make 1,000?
Sorry, repeat your question. Why would Levi's want to
Hire 2 units of labor when 1 unit of labor can make 1,000 revenue?
No. Now, here's the thing. That's a good question. Now, listen to this carefully. If the wage is $900, my question now, listen to this very carefully. If the wage rate that you're paying to labor is $900, my question to you is this first guy worth it? Is this first guy worth it? If you are paying him $900 and he is generating a revenue of $1,000, is that first guy worth it? Think again.
No, sir.
No, why not? Think about this. If the wage rate, now think about this. First thing that I totally get what you are confusing it with. Each worker will be paid the same wage. Why? Because they have the same skill set, they're doing the same work. Each person in the market who are doing the same type of job, that is what happens across the globe, right? So if I'm a teacher who is teaching a certain grade at a certain level, a certain subject in a certain country, I will be most probably paid the same as much as my peer is earning with same skill set, with same level and so on, with same experience and so on. Are you getting what I'm trying to say here? Now, if you are paying each production worker $900, so that would be same for all the workers who are working there. Now, if for instance, each production worker is being paid $900 wage, how much revenue is the first unit of labor generating? My question to you is, how much revenue is the first unit of labor generating for you? How much revenue is the first guy generating for you?
If the market wage is $900?
Yeah.
0.
No. Think about this. What do we have on the y-axis? How much revenue is that guy generating for you? Right? So what is on the y-axis? I know what's on the y-axis. The revenue that each unit of the labor generated. So the first guy generated 1,000, the second guy generated 900, the third guy generated 800, the fourth guy generated 600, and the fifth guy generated 500. That's exactly what we saw over here. Are you getting me or not, right? So I did not make this up. We did the calculations behind that, right? Okay, think about this. So first of all, forget about everything. First of all, tell me that let's first interpret what this graph is showing us. So this graph is showing us that the first unit of labor generated revenue of $1,000, right? How do we know this? Now your question might be, how do we know this? We calculated this. We assume that the first guy produced 100 units of the good, 100 t-shirts. Each t-shirt is worth how much? Each t-shirt is worth how much in the market? $10. So the total revenue that he generated was $1,000. Easy. This is making sense so far. Yes or no? Is this making sense? Right? Then how much revenue did the second guy generated? So that the second guy on his own produced how many units of the good? 80 units of the good, 80 t-shirts. Each t-shirt was worth $10. So that guy on his own generated $800 of revenue for the company. The third guy on his own produced 60 units of t-shirts, 60 t-shirts, and each unit was worth $10. So that guy generated revenue $600 and so on and so forth. Any confusion so far? Anything that's not clear? Is everything clear so far? Right? Now, I'm going to listen to this carefully. If the wage rate in the market is $900, which means that you will pay the first worker $900. Everyone that you hire, you will pay $900. If the wage rate in the market wage rate is $900. My question to you is hiring the first person worth it? Is hiring the first person worth it? And how would you compare if it's worth it or not? How will you find out if it's worth it or not? By comparing the wage with the marginal revenue. No, how can you say it's not worth it? We just saw, Amna, that person generated revenue of $1,000. So he will produce goods worth $1,000, whereas the company is only paying him $900. Yes or no? Why is that person not worth it?
Okay. He is, sorry.
Right? Are you getting me? Right? So revenue is the inflow of cash that the person is generating for the company, right? Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, the company is benefiting more. Maybe. Yeah, that's correct. Like why would he work for a lower wage? No, Mubin, but that's a good question. That's a good question, guys. That the person, not always it's very crystal clear. Are you getting me? It's not very crystal clear. I totally get it. I totally get it, right? But it's not always crystal clear that how much revenue is each person generating, right? So what you are basically saying that if I know how much revenue I'm generating for mega lecture, then why would I want to work at a wage rate lower than that? That's your question, right? But I mean, it's not always crystal clear. In my case, it is, right? But otherwise, it's not, right? But I mean, there are some complications involved, Mubin, so I do not want to address it right now because then we will, distract, we will get detract. I'll answer that question. Let's hold it on for the later moment. Okay. Now, my second question for you. If you think of the wage rate to be $900, students, now listen to me carefully, please. If the wage rate in the market is $900, each person has to be paid $900, then hiring the first 2 units of labor are worth it. The first guy will generate a revenue of 1,000 and you are paying him 900. The second guy is generating a revenue of 900 and you are paying him 900. So you're not technically making a profit on the second guy, but still, I mean, it's break even. You know what break even is? Revenue is equals to cost, right? So even the second unit of labor is worth hiring because he is being paid exactly the same amount as much revenue he generates. Yes or no? Students, are you following me or not, right? Are you following me or not, right? Now, things will become more clear. Let's quickly first complete this and I'll come back to this point, right? But obviously, hiring the third person is not worth it. Why is hiring the third person not worth it? Because he generates a revenue of $800, whereas you have to pay him $900. What kind of sensibility, what kind of economic logic
So
is this?
how do you know how much you're paying him? Like, can you determine that from the graph?
We are coming to it. We cannot. Until we don't know the market graph, we don't know how much we have to pay.
So we're just assuming that he's being paid 900 at this.
Yes. At this point, we're just assuming. At this point, we're just assuming. So we'll just complete off with these two graphs, and then you will find out that how much, how do we find out that how much is exactly being paid to that person, right? So right now it was just an assumption, but now we are coming to specifics, right? Now we'll see what happens in the market, right? Now we are doing the same thing for Tommy, right? So the first guy generates a revenue of how much? $900. The second guy generates a revenue of how much? The second guy generates a revenue of how much, students, right? Let's assume 800. The third guy generates a revenue of, I'm just, kind of making the example easier for us to understand, right? The third guy is generating a revenue of how much? Let's say, the third guy is generating a revenue of, let's say, 600, and the fourth guy is generating a revenue of, uh, fourth guy is generating a revenue of 500, and the fifth guy is generating a revenue of 400. Is there any confusion so far? Students, is everything clear? So we have plotted these two graphs based on the values that we have for these companies. So we have plotted this graph based on the values we have, right? Yes or no, right? Okay, now quickly have a look at this before the class ends, right? Now, the market demand is the sum of total demand. Market demand is sum of total demand, right? Now, the idea here is that you add the demand at a certain wage rate. You add the demand at certain wage rate, right? Now, if the wage rate is 1,000, Levi's will hire one person. And how many people will Tommy hire? None. I repeat myself. If the wage rate is $1,000, right? Now the market demand is sum of total demand, right? So if the wage rate in the market is $1,000, how many people would Levi's hire? One. How many people will Tommy hire? Zero. So the total demand in the market, if the wage rate is 1,000, would be, right? Would be only one. Students, are you getting me or not? That would be one at 1,000. But at $900, what will be the total demand? Levi's would hire two people and Tommy would hire one person. So the total demand in the market for $900 would be how much? Students, are you getting me or not? Are you following me or not? So that would be three